Welcome to another episode of Faith in Media with me, Carla, your host, and I'm delighted to have with us today author, broadcaster, journalist. I think that I'm going to say actress, performer, creative, the list is endless. Nicola Morrison. Welcome, Nicola, to Faith in Media. How are you today?
I'm really well. Thanks, Carla, for having me. It's a pleasure to be here. I'm really excited.
So am I. I am actually bursting for this conversation, which is, probably understandable when we kind of speak a little bit about what we're going to talk about today. You have lived an incredible, should I say, career path so far within occupying media space. And I'm so excited that we're going to be able to glean just some of the richness of your story. But most recently, you just published, is this your first book that came out this year?
Yeah, my first book.
And I love that it's in the corner, strategically in view. Victory is my name. Beautiful. But before we dive into all of that, do you want to just give us a little bit about yourself? Who is Nicola?
Oh, wow. Yeah. 250 pages later, who is Nicola? Today,
Who is Nicola?
Nicola is a woman of faith, a woman that loves Jesus wholeheartedly and is grateful for not just the legacy that I've possibly left, but just for the journeying that he's done with me on a day-to-day. Nicola is more confident and more bold and more self-assured at 40 than I was at 14. And I think I'm just loving life and feeling like I'm actually, for the first time, enough. And that's really liberating. I think that's who Nicola is in a nutshell.
That was massive in a nutshell. Who wasn't sure what to say? That was very in depth, and I think I'm going to enjoy picking that apart with you in our conversation today. Tell us a little bit about your history, about the things that you do now, kind of the journey that you've had within media particularly. That would be really, really great to hear.
Yeah, so I started out in media in the early 2000s, finished secondary school, went on to college, and then soon after university, I landed my first gig in media. I was receptionist, assistant, events coordinator, you name it, I did it. I just wanted to be in that space. I loved the hubbub. I loved the energy. I always wanted to be on screen, but I didn't quite know how that would translate, but I wanted to be in that environment. So I worked for some big broadcast names, most recently being the BBC, where I was for 12 years. And that was a journey in itself. It was so much more than just a vocational journey. I really feel like I was having some kind of rebirth almost into my adulthood, finding my voice, backing myself, learning how to be my biggest advocate, my biggest cheerleader when that feels really kind of countercultural to how we're supposed to be in terms of humility and modest and all those things. And I'm currently now an editor at a Christian organisation, the Evangelical Alliance. I'm a media manager there as well. I'm loving it. I've been there for 2 years. But yeah, it's been a journey. It's definitely been a journey, and it's not an easy road, the one that I chose or the one that God chose for me. But I can't imagine myself doing anything else, if I'm honest.
I mean, the passion is undoubted. Even just the way that you're speaking about it, your eyes are lighting up. So whoever's listening to it, trust me, there's just a lot of glow happening right now. And it's interesting, like you've had such a real full cycle, because if we look back even 12 years ago, how different the landscape is with journalism, with media. What has been some of the things that kind of you have seen really shift over time for you, like from when you started trying to find your first kind of, stepping stones into what you're experiencing now? How have you seen changes happen?
Oh, the changes have been really big. I think the changes have been big in terms of representation, and that's both as women, but also as people of colour on screen. When I started out, I don't know if it's because I only saw people of colour in children's TV that I gravitated towards that. And now I'm so excited that I'm in the space of journalism, having, done a long stint at the BBC in the news space. And I'm seeing, every time I sit on this TV or I'm online scrolling through news feeds and I see people that look like me, I get excited because there wasn't a lot of that 12 years ago, let alone, women of colour, younger generationally, the news space is generally older on air content makers. So to see people that look like me, that have curly hair like me, and, you know, all the kind of breaking all those social norms that existed when I first started out is really, really exciting. We have still a long way to go? Yes, but has it come a long way? Absolutely. So I'm so encouraged by, you know, the growth that I've seen just in just over a decade of my own career.
That's incredible, especially what you mentioned about breaking new barriers and opening opportunities that you needed for yourself, but there was no reference or benchmark to aim for. You had to be the benchmark. That in itself must have been quite an ordeal. How did you find navigating that space? Like, there's no one there that looks like me, but I'm going to go anyway. That takes a level of tenacity and courage. Tell us how you found navigating that space when you were in a minority kind of, like, you know, representative space.
I wonder if sometimes, like, God has always been preparing me to be in these kinds of spaces. When I talk about my childhood in the book, and I talk about the fact that I was often an outcast and I often didn't have a big social group of friends, and then as a teenager trying to kind of navigate that and kind of be like, well, I don't fit into one mold and I kind of don't want to conform in that way. And then I think about being a person of faith. Very often we are the minority, very often our voices are marginalized and we're on the fringes in our spaces. So I almost feel like God has been preparing me, that I've kind of, it is a bit sad to say, but I have always been used to not being of the majority in a room. But what that has done, it's given me a courage and a boldness that I see people now at my age that are navigating those spaces that struggle a lot more because it's very foreign to them. Whereas I've always kind of felt like I'm always going against the tide and I'm always kind of not following the status quo. So I'm not the person that walks in the room and notices that I'm the only person of colour in the room, because I'm very often the only person of colour in the room, and I kind of get past that very quickly. And I think God constantly puts me in spaces like that, one, so that I can be, as you said, you know, people can now see those social norms and the barriers being broken down, and maybe walk into a room and see me in there and think, oh yeah, there's someone else like me, which is something I didn't have. But it doesn't make it easy. It doesn't mean it's super easy. It doesn't mean it's not challenging, because you constantly have to be reminding yourself of who you are, because very often you're not being affirmed. And that can be challenging, especially when you're still trying to figure it out. And sometimes you don't feel 100% confident in what you're, you know, what you're pitching or what you're doing. But the more I've been in those spaces, the more I've kind of been able to overcome those challenges and get out of that kind of imposter syndrome and all those other challenges that those spaces hold when you are the only one.
I really, really admire that so much. And I love that you kind of allude to, you have to be good with being the number one. You have to be good with being the only one. How do you feel like you've cultivated, if I'm going to say in like kind of layman's type terms or just like normal terms, is like you've developed clearly thick skin, that this is not an easy, you know, path to follow. This is not an easy environment to navigate. It's so competitive, and a lot of our young up and comers that are within our network are experiencing, gosh, where to start, and already the bar so high. And we've already spoken about how media landscape has changed. How have you developed that sense of, you know, I think fortitude and resilience that clearly is just emanating from you?
I feel like for me, it always came back to, I really believe that this is what God has designed for me. I believe that this is my passion. This is where I'm supposed to be, because I've been blessed to be put in these situations or to be put in these environments. And so the fact that I became good at it was almost like a byproduct. It wasn't what opened the door. I didn't just turn up and I was great at what I did. I'm still not great at what I did. There's always learning to be done. But I think for me, it was that understanding of like, this is what I want to do. So, you know, you can choose 20 other vocations if you want to, Nicola, but they're not going to fulfill you. They're not going to be your passion. You might even be better at them, but you might be better paid. You know, there are all those other things that you have to think of in terms of the metrics. Ultimately, when you've decided this is a career that you want or something you're passionate about, lean into it. I absolutely advocate for people to lean into stuff that you enjoy, because the pay salary is not going to work. It's not going to be why you get out of bed. You're going to have challenges from colleagues. You're going to have challenges from bosses and editors and line managers and all those things. So you really have to be sure this is what you want to do. But once you're committed, once you're dedicated and you're honing your craft, I really feel like there is going to be times when you do have to have a resolve. You do have to say, that person got the opportunity because of who they know, not because of what they can do. And that can be really tough. And I think for me, I've always just come back to that scripture about comparison is the thief of joy. And I always remind myself, as you know, if I can't cheer someone on, I can't celebrate what they're achieving, then I'm feeling like it's taking away from me. And I need to remind myself that other people's journeys, other people's blessings do not negate what God has placed me for, and what's for me will not pass me and will not miss me. But that takes some talking to. You know, that's not always like something that we slip into as a default. Sometimes we have to kind of remind ourselves of those things.
I appreciate so much when you've spoken about the anchoring of, like, you need to know, like, you know, is this where I'm supposed to be?
Mm-hmm.
And you've utilized, you know, the words and the language, I think, so blatantly. Has God called me to be there?
Mm-hmm.
Because honestly, if he's called you somewhere, it's probably the safest place in probably quite a backbitey, competitive, potentially dangerous environment. You need to know, when I'm called and I'm doing what I've been obedient to, what I've been called to do, he's going to be there. He's going to protect what he's called of you to perform and to do. And to hear you speak about that and lean into it on the daily, I can imagine, is not an easy feat. But like you said, would it be safer anywhere else or fulfilling anywhere else? Probably not. Tell us a little bit about what it's like, the day in the life of an editor. For those that are intrigued about kind of occupying that space potentially, what do you engage with just in like a daily kind of normal scenario for you?
So I think the main thing is that I am a consumer of news. I'm a consumer of news, consumer of current affairs and social affairs. So it means I'm on social media all the time. I am scrolling, I am absorbing, I am reading, I am learning. And I think it's a great space if you're pursuing a line of a vocational career in journalism, or you want to be an editor. You really have to be a curious person. You have to want to dig into stuff. You're going to have to want to be well read, and you know, you're going to have to be someone that loves stories and pursues stories. So my brain is always thinking about the stories and people, and what does that mean? How can we connect? And what's the message? And can we inspire? And all those kinds of things. And then obviously part of it is dictated by, you know, your environment. So if you're in the secular mainstream news space, then you're going to have a news agenda that's different to possibly mine today in a Christian organization. But ultimately, I think it's still about people, it's still about stories, and it's still about connecting. So you need to be somebody, I'm actually a bit of an introvert, but I've had to be somebody that's kind of a bit more tenacious, a bit more, you know, visible, and kind of go out there and network and engage with people. And very often when I've just been led by God to connect with somebody, as I'm sure you can testify, because I think that's always how we connected.
Another story for another day. Very wild, but amazing.
Right.
Yes.
You just connect, and then before you know it, there's an opportunity, or there's something where you're like, I was meant to have this encounter. This is meaningful. What can we do with that? So I think definitely be someone that's engaging, someone that's willing to get out and talk to people. I mean, you don't necessarily have to be on the beat, because that's not always how journalism is done anymore, but you definitely need to be somebody that's visible, that's engaging, and that's always looking for stories. I think that is key.
Such great tips. And I think my question to you is, how do you keep your life sane? Because that level of consumption, we talk about having this healthy work-life balance, and how we've become so engrossed and consumed with media in a daily life. This is obviously part of your job. You have to be there. How do you find, you know, disconnecting? Is that an easy process for you? How do you navigate balance?
It's a form of dedication. I think when I wake up in the morning and I have to remind myself to open my Bible app instead of Instagram, because first of all, I need to check in with God, what's the news, before I check on social media. So there are moments when I kind of, check myself and say, hold on a minute, Nick, you're getting a bit too drawn in or too pulled away from where I think my mindset should be. But equally, I think it's about, I'm a big advocate for mental health. And as you mentioned, having read the book, you'll know why. But for me, I'm very aware of what voices I'm listening to and where the noise is coming from. And sometimes I can just start to feel not myself. And I think, well, Nick, is that because you've been scrolling for too long on social media and seeing fake realities of people's lives? And, and that can have an impact. And recognizing that is super important, and going, actually, I think I'm going to put my phone down now, or I'm going to just call someone, or I'm going to have some time out, watch telly, or go and pray, or go for a walk with the dog. So I'm very sensitive to like how things are impacting me. And that could also be around, I know the pandemic for a lot of people was extremely paralyzing. It was all bad news. It was all grey. It was never going to end. And I was more aware than ever of how much noise I was letting into my space and how that was impacting my mental health and the mental health of friends and family. So I think it's about everything has to have some kind of self-control. There has to be some kind of filters. And I think recognizing that is super important. And for me, quality of life is really, really big. So I take a holiday every 2 to 3 months. I take time off. Even if I'm having a staycation, I fast, which means no media, no TV, no secular music, all those kinds of things are all things that I've built in to make sure that I am grounded and that I'm not getting too pulled into the things that necessarily my job leans me into. And just keeping some checks and balances is really important.
Yeah, I really respect that. And like, there is clearly a very rigorous sense of self-awareness and intentionality as to how you've navigated, or should I say, safeguarded yourself really from like, I need to recognize, and you are clearly quite sensitive to triggers quite quickly in terms of, I recognize this because, and I love that you've alluded to it because that's where I want to go next, is you speak so much about how these things, or just life or external things, end up influencing mental health. And I want to go to my next step is like, you recently become an author. Huge congratulations in the book. Victory is my name. What a title. Well, I love it. It's bold. I love that you preface the book by speaking about its origins, about your name, that it is a victory of the people. Tell us, how did you come to deciding that this was going to be the title of this very beautiful, very powerful, very moving? It makes you feel all the feels, which I've shared with you before, and we'll probably break that down a little bit now. But tell us how you got to this name first and foremost. It starts with victory. Before we even get into reading anything, how did you come to that?
It was obviously, as you mentioned, my name, the Greek Latin origin is victory of the people. So I'd known that, and it was actually my grandma that had given me a little keyring. I don't know if you're old enough to remember this, Carla, but back in the day you could go to some
Excuse me,
card
I'm
shops.
also just 40. I remember things like that. Thank you.
Okay. Oh, there you go. So I very often think I am in the same generation as the people I speak to, and then I make references and they're totally lost. And I'm like, oh, thanks for that. So I'm in good company. So
Yes,
you'd
you
go
are.
to the card shops and you would swing this turnstile thingy, and they'd have all the names and they'd have the attributes and names. So my gran had bought me one, so I had it from a really young age, and it had all the attributes and it said the definition of my name. So I'd known for a long time the meaning of my name, but needless to say, having read the book, Carla, you'll understand that I didn't feel very victorious through much of my early years. So when I came to thinking about writing the book, it really was my mindset was very much on who I am today. And I really didn't want it to have that kind of victim mentality. I really didn't want this to be a woe is me story where people are just going, oh my gosh, this poor woman, she's been through so much. I didn't want that. I wanted it to be exactly what the title says. I wanted people to look at it and go, she's victorious, and she's emphasizing that as, it's the destination of her journey that she really wants to talk about, not just all the trips and trials and tribulations. Whilst they're super important, they don't define me. They're part of my story, but that's not who I am. And so it kind of, those two things, they kind of just named the book themselves in that culmination of my mindset plus the meaning of my name. And then every time I mentioned the title to someone, they did what you did. Oh, that's powerful, and it kind of pulled people in. And I thought, well, that's great because that's what I want it to do. And I think that has much more impact than it just being a sob story. So,
and it leaves that mark without a doubt. And I feel, for me personally, in my experience of the book, I do feel that is the taste that you're left with. But what inspired you to kind of go down the route of writing this in the first place? What was behind that for you?
In one word, pandemic. Too much time, no people, nothing to do. I was still working full time as a journalist, so I was still doing news. I was still covering news and things like that, but I had a lot of time. And it'd always been on my mind that I would that I should tell my story, because people always told me I should write a book. Whenever I'd share little bits of my life, they'd always say, you should write a book. And we'd always laugh and, and then I started to think, well, I see the impact that my story has on people, and nobody had, I have to preface this with, nobody knew my whole story. So everybody that I'd known across my life knew a chapter of my life. And having read the book, they're like, I now see all the dots joining up. I knew that part of your life. I didn't know that part. I knew this story. I didn't know that. So there was always bits that I would share with people, and they'd be really, blessed by it, or they'd be moved, or they'd be touched that I'd experienced something similar to them. So I always kind of knew my story was powerful in how it connected people, and it kind of empathized, but also gave people hope because they kind of didn't feel alone. And I realized that it was kind of a tool in that way that I could use that could kind of bridge gaps with people. And then obviously, as I say, the pandemic came, and I was kind of like, oh, got a lot of time in my hands. Why don't I just start writing? So I did, and it was extremely freeing because I had absolutely no intention of publishing it, and that was amazing. I was just writing. It was just a project. I was just writing. I was like, this is great. I'm right. Oh my goodness, I forgot about this. And I was just loving it until God dropped in my spirit that it would be published. And I froze and was like, oh, that's it. No more writing for me. I am not publishing this. Delete that chapter, and I literally was like frozen for like 2 months, couldn't go back to it, couldn't continue writing. Now it was almost like audience were in the room when I was writing. And that took me a long time to kind of go back and continue to write. And there were many times when I would backspace and say, no, leave it in. If you didn't know it was for other people, you would have left it in. So there was a lot of kind of tension and tussling with myself in that process once I knew it was for other people and not just a little Dear Diary project. That's in a nutshell. It wasn't really a nutshell, it's a long answer, but that's kind of how
I love that answer. I love it. That's so interesting. And also, because one of the things that I did want to ask you is like, who were you writing for? But it sounds like you just were like writing for the love of writing, and it was like it was an opportunity presented to you. But then to feel later on a prompting that actually this has purpose, that must have been a huge thing to engage. What did you learn about yourself in the process of all of a sudden now you're a writer, and now God has dropped in your heart that actually he's got purpose for your writing? How did that, what happened for you on the inside discovering that in that tiny space of time?
Yeah, that's a great question. It was cathartic, confronting, emotional at times. It was surreal at other times. I would literally, because if you can imagine the kind of juxtapositioning of my life, I'm working, I'm in meetings, I'm taking a break, and I'm writing a bit of the book, and I just happened to write a bit of the book that's, about tragedy that's happened. And then I'm back in meeting an hour later, and my brain is like, oh my goodness, I've literally just been transported to a crazy part of my life, and now I'm back in the reality. It was quite surreal. And then at times I was shocked at how easily I was able to write about really hard stuff, reliving certain experiences. And then other times I would be like, I'd write it and then I'd go to proofread it and I couldn't proofread it because I'd be really overwhelmed and emotional. And I'm like, you just wrote this. How are you? And it was almost like being the writer and then being the reader. I had completely different experiences. So it was really, really surreal. It was really, I think this book is as much for me as it's for others. This book was to heal the little girl inside of me that I still lamented about. And I definitely feel like by the time I'd written the book, we had resolved that we were one, and she was okay, she was good, and she was a survivor. And I think before then I'd probably almost departmentalized them, and she was like, well, compartmentalized. She was a different person to me, and it was sad to think about her. And I think the book really brought that together in a really kind of spiritual and enlightening way.
We've spoken, like, in your book reflects this a lot, but you've also just shared just freely yourself in terms of it has been a journey when we talk about that 18-year-old girl and now accomplished woman Nicola today. Does it feel different when you were navigating those things in terms of the person you were, the faith that you had? Do you feel like that's a different Nicola now? Or do you just see the same person, but maybe just thicker skin? I don't know.
I actually don't see. I mean, it's weird. In some ways, in terms of how I respond to the world, I'm different. in terms of like who I am, Rosa Parks spirit that I talk about, that girl that just wouldn't conform, just wouldn't shut up and toe the line, and you would have been more popular, and you know, all those things. That girl that kind of goes, right is right and wrong is wrong, and like, I'm gonna speak to the person that no one has time for, or I'm gonna, that has always been me, and that will always be me, because it's what God's put in me. I'm meant to see the people that other people don't see. So I'm the girl that spots someone looks sad on the train and goes over and talks to them and they tell me their sob story. I believe that God has given me that gift for a reason, because I recognize me in people, and I recognize pain in people, and I recognize when people just need to be affirmed or held or comforted. So I think I'm still the same person. I think I just respond to the world differently. So this is a Nicola that says, I reject your metric system of me. I reject that in your metric system, I'm not worthy, or I'm ugly, or I'm not popular, or I don't have enough likes. I reject that identity that the world is putting on me. I'm still the Nicola that loves people, loves connection, wants to be loved and wants to love. I think I'm still that person at my core. So I don't feel massively different. If anything, it's people's reaction to me that makes me realize I've grown and I've changed, and my story, obviously. But ultimately, I think I'm the same person, just with a purpose and with an understanding of who I am and who I belong to. I think that's the main difference now.
I love how in the book you refer to this autobiography, this memoir, as it's the middle part of the story. So I'm going to ask you, what's next for Nicola with that in mind?
I pray so. I pray at 40 that there's some more chapters to come.
Oh, absolutely. Absolutely. We believe it.
There's more that I want to achieve. What's next? I think for me, I really want to continue, because I mean, the book's it's 2 months today that the book's come out, and it feels like 2 years. So much has happened. It's been a whirlwind. Yeah. I don't think I could have been prepared for, you know, the reaction to the book. And it's kind of funny because it all kind of trickles through around now. Anyone that's released a book will know you released the book, and then people have to read it. And then slowly you start to see this reaction, this kind of tsunami of people getting in touch, going, oh my goodness, I've just read, oh, you know, so I think for me, I really want to continue speaking into spaces about mental health awareness. I really want to speak into spaces about young people, about identity, around belonging, around abandonment, childhood trauma. I really want to speak in spaces around empowering women and affirming women in male-dominated spaces, and especially again with my craft in journalism, just helping other people navigate what that looks like, because it's not like a normal vocation where you study, as you know, you do an internship and then you get the job. It's just such a fickle and hard industry to navigate, and there is no rule book, and that is the hardest thing, that there is no rule book. So there's lots of spaces that I want to speak into. There's lots of mentoring and coaching that I'm now involved in doing. I want to continue. And I mean, sky's the limit, dare I say it. It's really up. I'm just like, God, this is the book you wanted, so it's over to you. I'm just, you know, I'm just the prop.
I love that so much. And I think it's so clear that you have a very clear self-awareness that life, everything that you have been taught along the way, whether it's in your professional career, the journey that you've been on, has equipped you for this moment. And you see yourself employing all of those facets as part of what Nicola is doing. And I think that's so encouraging for our young up-and-comers that are in our network, especially who feel called to this. Like, so it's a unique landscape. If you're occupying media, it's not the same as you go to school, you study, and automatically there's this output of success story. It can take some very interesting twists and turns. What would you say, as we kind of wrap up, which I feel we'd be here forever if I had my way, but I realize we can't do that, 1 or 2 tips of success and encouragement for people that find themselves, like you said, called to this space? What would you encourage them with from your wealth of knowledge?
Yeah, I definitely think that it's important that you find your tribe. So for me, I found a couple of people initially that believed in me, or that saw something in me and were able to encourage me in times when I was really, really like just not sure. I mean, everyone was telling me no, maybe I actually wasn't as good as I thought I was. And so I think industry-wise, it's really important to have sponsors, which is what I'd call them. So sponsors are people that are going to be able to open doors for you, people that are going to be able to put your name in rooms where you aren't. But then at the same time, I think you need cheerleaders, and that can be your aunt, your cousin, your best friend, people that you can just call in the toilet before you go to an interview and just say, do this. Those people that go, you got this, we believe in you. So you need a tribe, you need people around you that are able to affirm you. And that's easier said than done, but I think you have to be quite intentional. So if you're trying to network with people, if you're trying to build your network, it's about actually being intentional about garnering those relationships. It's all about relationships. So it's not about just, will you mentor me to someone that you've never met in an email? It just won't go anywhere. You want to have those personal relationships so people know you, and so when they hear opportunities, they think of you. And then I think you also want to have an idea of what you want to do. So for me, I was very clear on what I wanted to do and where I wanted to go. Because whenever you're asked, that is the time when you can't be wishy-washy. So whilst you would love to do entertainment, but you also like news, but you also like social media, and you kind of like doing children's TV, or you really do have to be quite intentional about where you want to go, because if you sound too fickle, they can't place you. And unfortunately, in this industry, that's what people want to do. They need to categorize you, to put you in a box. And then once you're in that box, you can break out of that box and you can think outside the box. But in the box first, and get people to kind of understand what you stand for. So, and then thirdly, I would say be about your business. So if you love music, if you love culture, that's what your timeline should look like. That's what your network should look like. You should always be looking for the next thing. You should always be thinking about what's coming up, who can I connect with, what's different, what's missing is always really important. What can I add to this genre? What can I bring to that? It's great to have representation. It's great if you're a woman. It's great if you're a person of colour, but that won't be enough to hold the door open. What else can I bring? What skills? Do I have a language? Do I play an instrument? Always be thinking about your USP. So that's probably the top tips I would give.
That is a major CV preparation seminar in 2 minutes. I'm so impressed. Nicola, this has been an absolute pleasure and an honor to have had you share your story, share your work with us in such a candid way. And I know that anybody that comes across this conversation will be so enriched. Please make sure that you get Nicola's book, read it, be inspired. And do you know, I thought that I used to work hard until I read the book, and I'm like, I have no clue about what it means to work hard, and really go for what you feel God has called you to do. So if you need some inspiration, please follow Nicola, all of her socials and the work that she's doing, and read the book. You will not be disappointed. God bless you, Nicola. Thank you so much for being with us today. You've been listening to Faith in Media with Carla Adebekun. Make sure you catch our episodes and hit subscribe. Please share and leave us a comment. Christians in Media is a UK charity that supports, encourages, and inspires Christians from across the ever-changing media landscape. Find out more at www.christiansinmedia.co.uk and connect with us via our socials.